he's up to. He's picking me like chicken, shucking me like corn, stewing me like an ice.
I don't do sit-ups. I don't do chin-ups. I don't do nothing but get up through them guts with my Johnson, bro. The hell is you talking about, bitch? Anybody, I'll let all y'all know. My exercise is up to them thighs, bro. Believe that, bro.
Here's our JoEB, and the JoEB, baby, JoEB, rock, cock, and JoEB rally. JoEB, and the JoEB, baby, JoEB, rock, cock, and JoEB rally. We're coming to you, only seeking the truth about JFK. It's a long-coming podcast crew. Tell 'em, Joe, here we go.
You're muted, donk.
And always happens. And here we go, maybe.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 326, the Oswald Puzzle Part 2. Not sure what's going on, but I do know half of what's going on. We just were informed a couple of hours ago that David Boylan was not going to be able to be with us here this evening due to an illness, which is totally understandable.
Yep.
Not sure what's going on with Larry. He was supposed to be here, and he may still pop in. So it's been one of them days. So we apologize. But, you know, Larry was nice enough. Larry and David were both nice enough to send us an advanced copy of their book, The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay? And let me say, this is a very thick boy, clocking in at like between 400 and 500 pages. And it's chock full of goodness, as per the usual when you have somebody named Larry Hancock attached to your book. I mean, this dude is one of the most respected JFK researchers in the game today. Pardon me. Let me wash down. This was a little KFC.
The Colonel? Yeah.
Some good old chicken sweet tea, baby.
Ooh, sweet tea. Yeah, let's say hi to a couple people in the chat before.
Yes, welcome them in, Joe, if you will.
Sure. We have Trey, who is on his way to Shreveport as we speak.
Shreveport Trey.
Yeah. We would expect nothing less. Mr. Scott Edwards, and it is Scott's birthday today.
Happy birthday, Scott. Hello, Scott. Happy birthday, Scott.
Yes. And
35 years young.
Yeah. I don't know his age. I know he is going out for a big dinner tomorrow.
It's in the chat, Joe, but I'm not going to out him.
Yeah. Well, he's a good planner because he planned his birthday dinner for tomorrow night and not Friday night.
Oh.
Being mindful.
We appreciate that.
Yes.
We appreciate that. I hope you have the happiest of birthdays, sir.
Yes, for sure. Hello, Mr. James Smith. Hopefully Joe's had a chance to watch Office Space since last week. I haven't watched it since last week. I have seen it. I am missing the reference.
That is a great movie. I love that movie.
It is. And my favorite part is when they interview the guy and he's like, what do you do? Well, I come in 15 minutes late. Then I stare at my computer for an hour. And
they keep moving the guy around with I just want my stapler. Can I get my stapler, please?
Yeah.
Why are you putting me down here?
South to West should be a good show. Yes, we expect Larry to be in
And then he
momentarily.
smashed the shit out of that copy machine
Hmm. Yeah.
to the Beastie Boys.
He says, "Thanks very much, Scott. 65 years of nonsense. You're not 65. You're
He
not.
outed himself.
He's like 55. But I think he lives in New Jersey, which is not far from me. So
Jersey boy.
yeah. Let's see. Zendar61. Howdy all. Howdy. Sally, good evening.
A recent spook, Zendar. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Hello, Sally.
Paula Jane, of course, is here. Mark says, "Who did it?" We'll get into that later. We don't promise.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And
Mafia,
nobody.
the Mafia, the CIA, the
James
Cuban
Files,
Exiles,
Mac Wallace.
the CIA, LBJ, and Anthony. Greetings from Melbourne, Australia, and here we go. That is true.
Anthony.
Yeah.
I think that's our carpet salesman.
Ooh.
It's either our carpet salesman or our real estate agent.
Timothy Ryan, what's up, Big Joe and JoJo? Big Rob and JoJo. Not
What's
Big
up?
JoJo.
Give him another 5 years.
Yeah, true. Robert Oswald's Ghost in His House, Perpetual Concepts.
What's up, PC? Big Mike.
Alpha 66. Howdy. Let's see. TD. Of course, we can't forget Tiny Dancer. Don't act your age unless you have to.
That's right. You're only as old as you feel. And today, Rob feels about 82 years old. But we will get through this, I promise.
Yeah. And Scott said he was born in New Jersey, but lives in Canton, Ohio. Okay, there we go.
Yes, home of the Hall of Fame.
Yes, yeah. Football Hall of Fame. And Tiny, as you know, Ruby has been, I am on in a safe house or on the lam, as the Mafia would say. And Ruby is not allowed at this.
No dogs allowed.
Yeah. And she is with my mother, but she will be back by next week's members only. So
by then she will have forgotten who in the hell Joe Borelli is.
No, I hope not. And Jack Taylor as well. So,
oh, John, thank you, buddy. Thank you. What's up? Thank you for the super chat, bud. Appreciate you.
Hey, John. Thank you so much.
And I got a special shout out, Joe. We're not going to see her in the chat, but she is listening. And that would be our Rocket Queen, Colleen, who's in the process of moving, which sucks. Hard.
You're telling me.
Yeah. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Colleen. Hopefully she's like I told her, hopefully she's just directing traffic, like put this over there, move this here, and not actually doing any physical labor. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully she has a moving company or some friends to help
right
her there. Yeah.
So what is up, Colleen? We know you're listening.
Yeah. And rest Perpetual Concepts. Wesley Frazier did it, then went on to play Wesley in Mr. Belvedere. Rest in peace, Bob Uecker.
Oh, I love those old school sitcoms, man. They don't make them like they used to, man.
They really don't. They really don't.
They don't.
Yes, Johnson mattresses on the lamb. It is.
There's Colleen popping in.
Oh, Colleen. Hopefully your move is going well, ma'am.
What's up, Grunge Truck? We see you in here. Why would Oswald be stupid enough to leave spent shells all over the floor? That is a good question. One that we've pondered on the previous shows of how those shells just happen to fall directly under the rifle instead of being ejected forcefully to the
Mhm.
right, and then ping, ping, pinging off the floor even further. But
Right. And,
it's one of
and we
those.
covered last week how some of the gentlemen on the fifth floor heard the uh, discharge of the shells hitting the ground, but not all of them.
Yes.
I think Jarman did. I don't think Bonnie Ray did.
Oh no, Colleen. Her and her 70-year-old mom. Oh my gosh. I know you're hating it. Oh boy. That is brutal.
And we have Bungold in. Hello, Mr. Bungold. How are you? As we are waiting for Larry, hopefully, to come in soon.
Yes,
Mr. David.
we are filibustering.
Yes.
Is what we're doing.
Yeah. Hopefully, we don't have to do it for that long, but because
Maybe an hour
running.
if he got his time zones fucked up, but we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Paul, howdy, howdy, howdy. It's our buddy Paul. What's up, buddy? Mark. The coup picked them up and threw them there. Yeah. They were, somebody picked them up and put them back down, would be my guess. The DPD.
Mhm.
If there was any shots fired from that window, it could have been a complete setup with somebody just placing the shells there and not thinking, oh, the rifle should probably eject these, and just kind of fling them a little bit. But instead, they just put them on the floor kind of close together. And yeah, who knows?
Right.
Yeah, Oswald never saw the end of that movie. Ain't that a bitch? War is hell. And so is not knowing the end of the movie.
Yeah. Kind of an ironic title, right? And I think he learned that maybe he didn't realize it when his spy games he was playing did not end up well for him, which is a big part of the Oswald puzzle book. And his games might have caught up with him. And we'll get into that.
But yeah, I mean, the book itself is, of course, all about Lee Harvey Oswald and the enigma that he was as a person. When you block out all the bullshit of the pictures that the Warren Commission wanted to paint this guy as, okay, what they painted him as and who he actually was are two totally different things. And it starts from a messed up childhood, an overbearing mother, or maybe a not enough bearing mother, absentee father figures. There's a big age gap between him and his brothers, especially with John Pike or Pick. And Oswald had it rough moving around so much and going to all these different schools in all these different states. Of course, somebody like that's going to have some behavioral issues, some discipline issues, and all of these factors, growing up mold you into the person you're going to be as an adult. And sometimes that's catastrophic and leads you down a path of, I mean, easily, Joe, he could have been easily led down a path of crime, burglary,
Or
just
worse. Yeah.
a thief, murder. Well,
Yeah.
but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But what it turns out to be is, they try to paint him as antisocial, a loner, and all this stuff. And at various stages of his life, you can see that that's just not true. He had friends in school. He had friends in the Marine Corps. He had friends in Russia. He had friends when he came back. Was he a peculiar guy? Yeah. Yeah,
Of
he was a weirdo, right? But I think that if you got into a conversation with Oswald and you could hold your own, with what he was saying or counterpoint or viewpoints, I think that you could earn his respect. You know, I think he didn't suffer fools lightly, at least in his mind, right? But he was able to befriend people like George DeMorenshield, somewhat Michael Payne. I think if you're hanging out with somebody and you're going to these ACLU rallies together, and there's got to be an element of some kind of friendship. It's not just like a forced, well, Ruth said we have to hang out, so I guess we got to hang out, kind of thing. Of course, after the fact, nobody was Oswald's friend. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near this dude. Nobody wanted to acknowledge they ever talked to him. Of course, you want to distance yourself from this guy as much as possible, considering the horrible thing that he's accused of doing. And when it comes to one of the most often debated topics of Lee Harvey Oswald is, of course, what was his motive, Joe, to shoot John F. Kennedy? Supposedly, we know that he read 2 books, Profiles in Courage and another William Manchester book about John F. Kennedy. Everything you've ever heard, like from Marina or Ruth, say that he admired John F. Kennedy, thought he was a great American, happy with he was president.
Mm-hmm.
And it just doesn't jive with the fact that he just decided one day he's going to kill him.
Right.
I mean, and when you think about things in these personal lives that are so often forgotten, I'm sure it was national news in August of 1963 that the Kennedys had just lost their son, their very, very young infant
Yeah.
son.
Patrick, was that his
Patrick.
name? Yeah.
Yeah. It was devastating for them. Devastating.
Yeah. And didn't Marina kind of sympathize with Jackie or something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you naturally would. Nobody would
Right.
wish down on their worst enemy. I mean, that's
Right.
worst,
That's true. Yeah.
and to think, okay, this guy has just gone through this horrible ordeal, losing a child. Now we're going to kill him. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a pretty shitty person that could do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's you think of Lee and his Marxist views and Kennedy being considered as at least by the far right as a communist, right? Seeking uh, not nuclear war with Russia. It doesn't kind of jive that Lee, in all his studies of geopolitical issues, would be adamant to take out JFK, because if you have any foresight, LBJ is going to take over.
Right.
It, it it really doesn't make sense. I mean, I think the Walker shooting for Oswald, for Lee, makes much more sense than the JFK killing. And not killing, I'm saying the attempt on Walker.
Right. Right.
Ideologically.
Yeah. And a lot of people like to poo-poo Oswald as having shot at Walker, right? They just don't believe it, but when you put together, okay, the letter to Marina about that, that in case I get caught letter, here's what you do. Coupled with the fact that, she later after she was assured that nothing she would say could be held against her or whatever, she did come out and admit to having conversations with Lee about that. And, supposedly Oswald had in his possession, of course, found in Ruth Payne's garage, pictures of General Walker's house, which puts him in the vicinity. Of course, so why would you go take pictures of Walker's house?
Yeah, 2 pictures of behind Walker's house, the alley, I believe were found in his possession. So right, that it's it raises eyebrows for sure.
Yeah. To me, like I said, it's all about motive. Unless this guy was so despondent and so done with life, that he just didn't have any sliver of hope for his future. You know what I mean? Then to me, the only motive is ideology or money. Right?
Yeah.
And I highly doubt anyone proposed an offer of money to Oswald to kill President Kennedy. You know what I'm saying? Because he would likely have tried to leverage at least something up front, and we don't have any evidence of that.
Well, there is the Alvarado thing in Mexico City, that tall.
Well, I think it's been debunked.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
the guy
that's
a lie detector test and failed it miserably. So
yeah, it's just covered in his book in the Oswald puzzle, and I think they come to the same conclusion. And the CIA actually tried to withhold him from FBI interrogation by giving him over to, I think it was the Mexican police. I think it was covered in chapter 1. And he kind of gave the same story, but that is the only allegation, and that was pretty much debunked. You're right.
Yeah. So, like I said, when it comes to motive, unless he was just so despondent and just done with life, that's the only way I could see him doing it. And if that was his attitude, because he just didn't give a shit anymore about what happened to him, that did not come across after he's in custody.
Right.
He didn't say anything like that. He emphatically denied these charges. Everything that he said, was denying him having done something like this. He says, I didn't shoot anybody. Right? So if you were doing something just because you just didn't care about anything at all or anybody anymore, that attitude would come across at some point.
Yeah.
When you're in custody, either through questioning or statements to the press. I mean, he had the press at his fingertips every time he walked out the door, every time he went to a lineup, every time they moved him, every time, and he had chances to speak, and he did. And we have a lot of different interrogation notes from Bookout and Harry Holmes and Fritz, and none of this stuff is in there. And if he did something that he was proud of doing, if he truly was a Castro supporting Marxist / communist, if he truly was pissed at Kennedy over the Bay of Pigs debacle and all of that, and then he would have said something like that to be like, a martyr, like, Viva Fidel, I did this for you, something like that.
Yeah.
But we have none of that.
Yeah, he would have known he was done and caught at that point.
Yeah, I mean, this guy just had a baby a month before the assassination.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, they always say, well, he went back that Thursday night, tried to reconcile with Marina. They've been trying to go back to Russia. That wasn't happening. He went to Mexico to try to go through Cuba to get back to Russia, and that didn't happen. But I don't think things were that bad at that point in time to constitute what happened. on November 22nd, 1963. Unless their relationship was so terrible, which, of course, nobody's there in their intimate moments or their intimate discussions or what's going on. I can imagine that it wasn't good. They come back and Marina thinks that they're going to live the good American life, that
Yeah.
that they've heard about, that they see on their TV or whatever, and have all these luxuries and live high on the hog here in the United States. And then she's in these shitty apartments that
Yeah.
they don't have anything. They don't have a pot to piss in except their clothes, or what little clothes they have, maybe some pots and pans. She wants things like washing machines and stuff like that to make her life a little easier. Because back then they didn't have Pampers or Loves or anything like that. You had diapers. You had to, dump the shit out of them and scrub them, and and if you don't have a washing machine, you got to do this stuff in the sink with a scrubbing board, and 2 kids in diapers. Oh my God. I mean,
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to what you're saying. Marina definitely, I think even back to Russia, had this idea of the United States as being, uh, I don't know if exotic is the right word, but some new. She was excited by Oswald. And listen, Oswald, when he was in Russia, was getting paid, I think it was 7,000 rubles by the Red Cross and a similar amount by his factory. He was making a lot of money. The Russian government had given him his own apartment in Minsk. It was kind of baller, like a bachelor pad. He was involved with many girls. I think in the book, Larry said he had uh, 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 tried to marry 2 of them. What's the word? Proposed to 2 girls before Marina, and he was kind of like a player. And like we talked about during episode 1, Rob, with Larry, Oswald was the type of character to get bored easily, and he ended up contacting both the Russian and American embassies, trying to get back. They eventually were successful in that, and then only a few months later, I think it was, and I was surprised to learn this, 6 months after they got back on the Mazdam, he's writing letters to the Soviet embassy trying to get Marina back. So the honeymoon phase did not last long. And, he was balling in Russia. He was a mysterious figure. There's not many Americans that are chilling in Russia in 1961 and 1962. There's just not. So, and he had a good amount of money, an apartment. So things changed significantly when he came back, and Marina realized that, wow, he's really not that much. He doesn't have a house, he doesn't have a car, he doesn't have any money.
His family sucks.
Yeah, yeah,
They don't help him at all.
yeah. And Larry talks a lot about this back and forth relationship going on with Marina and Lee. So, and this is consistent between, and I think even going back to Russia, when Marina stayed with her family for a few weeks or a month or 2, right? She went back and then they came back
Yeah.
together. And I think we've all been in that type of relationship, right? At some point in our time, that you have, it may be a toxic relationship. You have a great chemistry with a girl initially. You
Sex
hook
is
up. What?
the sex is so good, you put up with the crazy
Yeah. And
until that outweighs the sex, and then it's like, okay.
yeah, and then things pull you apart, and then you miss each other and you come back together, and then repeat the process. You get in some more fights, you go back and forth. And we've gone through letters on past episodes, Rob, of Marina and Ruth. And Ruth is, I think, genuinely concerned about their relationship. about Lee's ability to provide for Marina and their daughter and their upcoming second daughter. That's maybe why she takes him in. I mean, I think there are other things going on there as well, of course, but I think there was a personal uh, sympathy that Ruth had towards Marina, and of course, maybe more. Uh, but this pattern repeated itself, and in the book, what Larry and David really do well is they prove the consistency of how this pattern repeated itself since they met, even going back to Russia, going back, to a few months after they got back in the United States to all the way up into the assassination. This was a constant back and forth, moving together. Lee tried to get a nice apartment in New Orleans. Marina was disgusted by it. Right? This is just it's constant.
Yeah, and if anything, if Marina was anything like post assassination, like as promiscuous as she was, pre-assassination, while Oswald's at work, if she's stuck at home with the kids, and
Oh, we have Larry on.
oh,
Hi
bring it
guys,
on.
Hey, Larry.
how you all?
Doing
Good,
well,
sir.
sir. How are you doing this evening?
We're in Oklahoma waiting for our next Arctic blast to come in this weekend. So I'm okay, just waiting for spring.
I hear you. Yeah, I'm ready too, man. I've had enough of this cold already.
Yeah.
About a week is good enough for me. It's like, okay, it's January when spring start.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, we went ahead and started, Larry. But we were just talking about Oswald's possible, because it's a big question. The motive for Oswald to shoot Kennedy, if he did, and we were just discussing the lack of motive. If you believe, that he's not really a pro Castro supporter, the fact that he, read this Kennedy biography, he read Profiles in Courage, never really had a bad word to say about the Kennedys. And you got to take into consideration the Kennedys had just lost a son in August of 1963, and then to go and kill this guy a couple months later is pretty cruel, I mean, so what do you think about the Oswald motive for the shooting?
Well, right off, I figure if the Warren Commission couldn't find one and they were really looking hard for it, then I probably can't find one either. I mean, as you said, Rob, they talked to people that they were hoping to get something, political, like he's radically political, that's whatever. And the people they talked to kept saying, he liked JFK's integration program, school integration. He was very much in favor of the administration's racial policies, the economic justice. He was writing about that. I think one example is when he was on a radio broadcast in New Orleans. The host kept pushing him to say something bad about Kennedy, in regard to Cuba. It's like, this is all Kennedy's fault and everything. And Oswald would not do it. He pushed back and said, there's some things I have problems with the administration policies about Cuba and have had problems, but not with JFK, as an individual. So even they couldn't push him into saying that. It's just not there.
Yeah, I was saying, he had every opportunity, even after he was in custody, to speak out and say something. But it was always just denials. I didn't shoot anybody. I don't know why they're doing this to me. And if he was proud of what he had done, he would have said something,
Oswald never shuts up when, it's like, if there are two things that are really atypical about Oswald, one is he speaks his mind. That would be strange for him not to speak his mind, especially if he's done something. He spoke his mind in the Marines, got him into trouble, spoke his mind in Russia, staged a one-man strike in a factory in Russia, got his boss into trouble. Oswald is not the guy to hold back. As a teenager, he goes home with his buddy and gets kicked out of the house because he's talking politics by, his buddy's dad. Yeah. So yeah, I would say if Oswald wanted to make a point, he made a point, and we know he's basically like fearless. He's kind of a drama queen. We see that in Russia, so if it were since and he'd write about it. I think that's the other thing. That's a big piece of the puzzle is missing. Oswald was a writer. We see in 63 he's writing monographs. He's even, he's writing about a compromise position between capitalism and socialism, and if he was doing this for political motives, you can bet there would be a manifesto. And you can bet he would have left it if he wasn't waving it around. And you can bet that the FBI, Mr. Hoover would have loved that. I mean, there's not going to be, Hoover is going to be looking for everything he can to tie Oswald to, a communist plot or, as a communist agitator, and he can't find it, so yeah, no manifesto is another good clue.
Yeah, something similar to like the we mentioned earlier about the if I get caught letter, pertaining to the Walker shooting, telling Marina what to do and all of that, but we don't have that with this,
And he did care about Marina. And with the new baby, I think I would have expected to see if he was doing something that radical, where he knows that he's likely going to be killed or certainly go to jail for forever. That he would not have made some provision or done something, left a note. That's again totally out of character. There's nothing that he did that is equivalent, to that note. It's just like, no, I'm not going off and kill the president and take care of the kids. Instead,
Yeah.
we find him the night of the assassination going, don't forget to buy shoes for June, for the baby, for June. Like, no, just doesn't fit.
Yeah, and Larry, before you came on, as we were kind of filibustering, we were talking about Lee and Marina's relationship and kind of back and forth, and how they had this kind of whirlwind romance, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. Did Marina go back with her family for a few weeks in Russia or a month? And this, and one of the best thing about your book, and we led up to this and talked about it before he came on, is the consistency of Oswald's behavior, and especially with his relationship with Marina. And you could see it with Ruth and everything. It was a back and forth, and we've all had these. At least I have had these type of relationships where, you break up and then you get back together, and then you break up and you get back together. Of course, when you have a kid and it's the 1960s, it's different than what I had dealt with. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit about kind of their back and forth.
Yeah, and it was a short romance, and you can see that's quite clear. Lee at that point in time in Russia was very much into women, and he'd already proposed once and he'd been rejected. And we know from Lee's own letters. I mean, we know this from Lee, and we know this from Ernst, his friend in Russia, that he was essentially on the rebound. He even writes a letter after he gets engaged, going, I'm still hung up on what's her name, but it's going to be better, So he was very entangled romantically at that point with Russian women. So it was a whirlwind romance, and Marina said that himself. He dated her heavily. He showed her a good time. They were always out doing things. He was very, very passionate. And then, okay, we get married, and not just get married. Okay, what he did not do, and I think we've discussed the fact before. It's not that Oswald could not be self-centered. It's not that Oswald did not say, "Hey, Marina, we're going to get married, and by the way, we're going back to the United States." He didn't tell her that. He didn't even disclose that until after the marriage. Not that she really objected, because there's a clear record of her, dating foreigners and being interested in, going overseas. But so he didn't reveal that. It's kind of like, oh, okay, and then he starts this like year-long crusade with the State Department trying to get back in. And, I think some of us have missed the point. It's like nobody just let him back in easily. You look at the State Department memos, and they didn't like Oswald from the get go because they thought he was obnoxious, and they thought he was self centered. And so when he comes back and wants to come back in, it's like, sorry, we you weren't nice the first time you were here. Why should we, pay attention to you? But Oswald Oswald always does his homework. He knows he didn't sign any paperwork. He knows he's in there legally. I mean, he did have a passport that allowed that. He had not done anything illegal, which is why he could make a statement again in that radio interview we talked about before. It says, "I was under the legal protection of the American embassy when I was in Russia," which is absolutely legally true. Now, not that Oswald's kind of like, not that he didn't say, and the State Department people like me. No, no. So yeah, he was legally under protection, but for a better part of a year, he is fighting to get back in. And Marina, as soon as the Russians realize it, Marina starts being harassed as well. She gets, she's a member of a couple of different parties, they start harassing her, they drop her membership, and she gets too stressed. So I think when she gets stressed from Oswald, certainly after a few months. Later on, it'll be she gets stressed by Oswald after a few weeks. But at that point in time, but she also gets stressed by this effort, for her to leave Russia because they're making it tough on her. So she goes back and lives with her parents for a time. That's kind of like their first separation. And that will become a routine pattern once they're back in the US. But I wouldn't blame it all on Oswald at that point, other than his quest to come back to the US has kind of got him in a logjam with the State Department. They're asking him to do things like they're demanding that he come back to Moscow. Well, he's not allowed to travel, so he actually has to sneak off work and be back there. Then they demand that he travel with her, so they're putting out roadblocks. So there's a lot of stress during that period of time. Plus, they're having a new baby, right? I mean, there's a lot of stress during that first period of time.
Yeah, and I think, Larry, one of the key points is that the Lee in Russia was a different Lee than the Lee that returned to the United States, right? And we were kind of leading up to this before you came on. He was a mysterious American in Minsk. He had his own apartment. He was, like you said, active with the ladies. He was doing certain things with the girls from the language school, right? Is that kind of what ones he kind of...
That's where he made, and he even writes, again, this is not, he even writes about his quote unquote conquests.
Yes.
And there are fairly short period, a week, a couple of weeks, again, which again, the Warren Commission's effort to paint him as antisocial doesn't really stack up too well to his efforts, his initial time in either Japan or Russia. But yeah, and that's a statement that Marina herself made not long after the assassination. I think that's been totally misconstrued. Yeah, he was a different guy. He had his own apartment. He had money. They would go out and do opera things that she was used to doing, and it was romantic at that stage in time. And I suspect mentally she's projecting Lee, kind of being up here in Russia, and when we get to America, we'll get all the things that the Americans have that we don't have here: cars, washing machines, those sorts of things. And of course, which didn't happen. But yeah, so I think it's perfectly realistic to say that the Lee that she dated and fell for and, married within a matter of weeks, a couple of months, was not the guy that she was, in 1963. And of course, being realistic, that's, I would say, does happen with young couples. You know,
Yeah.
what are the statistics? You know, I think our statistics now would suggest that it's not unusual for young couples that have a short time together to break up, to separate, to get back together. So again, that's not really unique for Lee. And
Yeah. They were both what, 21 years old or something at the time, or
yeah,
somewhere
early
close to that?
20s, yeah.
Yeah.
When you got to figure too, I doubt Lee was very much a ladies' man in high school. What little high school he did go to,
Mhm.
and then of course you go into the Marines where there is no women around, and then he leaves the Marines, and then he's on his way to Russia immediately. So the fact that he even knew how to speak to a girl is
Yeah.
pretty crazy. You know, from practically having no contact with females or anything to being in Russia and being this new American guy with this funny accent. I don't know about you, Larry, but I'm always a sucker for a British accent or something, man. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Uh,
Just add some flavor to it. Yeah. He as a jokester in school, yeah, but there's no sign that he had any dated or had any romantic relationships. However, my friend Jack Swipe did tell me that after he had and Jack had been stationed at Atsugi, arrived shortly after Lee had left. You know, he went out and interviewed afterwards some of the guys that had been there with Lee, and I think we can pretty well point to a particular point in time where Lee has his first experience with girls and his first serious experience, and
Mhm.
you know, for after that point in time, for a few months, it's really serious girl stuff. You know, he's in the clubs, he starts to drink. This is a brand new Oswald. So
Yeah.
that Oswald resurfaced in Russia for a time and then went away again. So, you know, it's his behavior is situational. Brand new in Russia, never been out with women and with Marine buddies and going to clubs. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then he gets to Russia and his new friend Ernst knows all these women, you know, and at the language school and you know, knows the social scene. So when he's got an entree, that happens, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. And when he's back in the U.S., it certainly doesn't. And Marina had reasons to complain. I think that's you know not totally, although they did have another child. But she's even in her letters and in her statement, she complains about his lack of affection and attention. And
Mhm.
I think by that point in time, we can see that Leah's probably more interested in reading and writing.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to jump because I wanted to ask you a couple questions on chapter one, your viewpoints. But since you brought this up, uh, yeah, his initial kind of foray into that was in Japan, right?
Right.
When he went out and was getting with girls. I don't know if it was at the Queen Bee or the Bluebird, maybe both. And one of the things I found really interesting in the book, and of course, a lot of people familiar with this are familiar with his contracting of a STD in Japan. But I think it was that guy you mentioned. What was it
Jack.
his name?
Yeah. Jack's
Yeah,
wife.
had looked into the records of other people, and it was actually something in the water, which is
Yeah.
why they said his gonorrhea was sustained in the line of duty, and not because he was on a covert mission to to get with some Russian spy at the Bluebird or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or Queen Bee.
Like that would be a tough covert mission. Yeah, we really need to recruit Marines to do that. You know, like that never happens naturally. But no, Jack actually interviewed the doctor more than just the records. Okay, he actually interviewed the doctor. And in his book, he goes into a fairly lengthy dialogue with the doctor going, yeah, this was a real problem because I was having to treat lots of people. And at first, we couldn't figure out what it was. And the stuff we were using, you know, that we thought for STD wasn't working, and he goes into a long explanation, but the fact they discovered it was not gonorrhea, it was not an STD, and that they finally managed to find a treatment for it. But that is why their records were remarked within the line of duty, because if it had been an STD, it's illegal. I mean, that is a citable violation of military regs. You're not supposed to be doing that, but the doctor actually took the precaution of making sure the people that he would treated for that particular thing were covered by the entry in the records.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And one more last thing about his kind of Japan adventures. Was that the only time where that you discovered that Lee was really influenced by alcohol?
Yeah,
Was like the
absolutely.
short time in Japan,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
As he's kind of discovering himself and getting
Yeah.
with whoever.
And he had not gone out to, even when they had leave in training at his tech schools or in his first station in California. He didn't hit the bars with the guys. And actually, one of the Marine officers that at that point in time that commented on Oswald was just like, he wasn't like the other guys at that point in time. The other guys really, typical Marines. His barracks buddies are going to the bars, they're going to the girls, and that just was not what Lee was doing.
Right.
I think what changed in Japan, though, maybe the biggest thing that changed is not just the alcohol and the girls. He made it clear that that was also the first time that he interacted with people that had his basic social beliefs. Let's call them socialist beliefs. I mean, he had tried to join the Young Socialist when he was a teenager in Dallas, and that hadn't happened. And he actually wrote him, and he said, is there a group here I can join? Well, the answer is no. Or could I join one, find one? I'll make one myself. That didn't happen. But when he started visiting the clubs, he started running into young Japanese, 20-year-olds that age, the same age, who were committed either communist or socialist. And they were talking about that manifesto. They were talking heavy influence from Russian communism in Japan at that point in time, and they were going for recruits. Some of them because they just believed it, some of them because they were being influenced to go do that and recruit. Maybe not covertly, but he himself said that that's the point in time that he really became interested in Russia because of his dialogues with these young Japanese. That's another thing that's very consistent about Lee. If you shared his beliefs, if you didn't make fun of his beliefs, if you seemed to be sympathetic, he would talk and he would talk and he would talk. Um, if you weren't, he becomes aggressive.
Yeah.
Like I knew people like that in college in the '60s, but that I think it's not just the alcohol; it's the contact with these young people for the first time that share some of his worldviews and
Yep.
political views.
Yeah. And that might have led to his decision to try, or at least submit an application to the Albert Schweitzer College. But before we move on from Japan, he did have two martials, one for misfiring a pistol that he was not supposed to have, that I guess grazed his elbow, right? And the second was pouring, I think it was a beer on a non-commissioned officer in one of the bars. Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah,
And that seems to be, at least the pouring of the beer part, the most aggressive physically, maybe Lee
yeah,
was. And of course, he's 20, he's exploring, he's
yeah.
drinking, he's out, whatever. And like we talked about in episode 1, he did not like taking orders. He was very much against authority. He was a nonconformist. So
The,
anything,
the timeline is important there, though. I mean, the incident at the time that he bought a gun, obtained a gun, and accidentally shot himself. What I mean, there's no sign that it was. If he had, again, actually, I've seen some of the paperwork, and Jack looked at some of the paperwork, and again, if he had been trying to get out of the Marines, I mean, he's not in combat. There's no real good reason. Kind of like I gotta get a wound to be rotated out. There's no good. They examined those kind of things, and there was no sign in the investigation that anybody thought that it was anything other than an accident. But what happened after that is he did get court-martialed. He lost a stripe. He was actually eligible for corporal, and his job performance up to that point had been quite good, and is very likely would have made corporal. He got busted, lost a stripe, and becomes very dissatisfied with the Marines, with the system. So the incident with his NCO happens after all of that. It's in a bar. He is still drinking, and it's not in a bar. It's not in a barracks or anything like that. And he's the other thing about Lee, and again, Jack, Lee was, you said nonconformist. Lee could do fine at his job. He was rated his radar work was good. His job skills were good when he wanted to be, but he wasn't good at chores. His barracks mates talked about the fact that he wouldn't keep anything clean. He wouldn't help out and that sort of stuff. He even got subjected to a couple of barracks parties, which, if you've been in the military, you know what that involves, and it's not a fun thing. But people did not want, yeah, scrub brush and but so he could, as I said, Lee could be an ass. There's no doubt about that. We don't want to, and if it's not something Lee likes or wants to do, Lee's just not very excited about it. So by the time we get to the conflict, he thinks by the time he gets with his conflict with the sergeant that he's getting KP, he's getting other duties, he's being treated unfairly, and he has an issue. I mean, he has a basic military issue. This one's not political. This one is, I'm getting duty assignments and I'm not being treated fairly. And so I think it was, he heard the sergeant say something, or thought he heard the sergeant say something. He had something, the sergeant said something, and whether he threw the beer on him, what he really did, what really got him into trouble actually is not so much the beer. Basically, he said, let's step outside. And the sergeant, probably in good judgment, said, no, let's not. Why don't we just go to the brig? Let's call the MPs. And that's where things really started to turn around for Lee. And he actually seemed to have backed out of the club scene. That's when, after that point in time, the reports are that he doesn't leave the base that much. After the brig incident, he's been in the brig twice. He starts reading Russian, teaching himself Russian. And pretty much by the time, he also had put in a request to stay in Japan, to extend a tour, and that was turned down. So at that point in time, it's pretty easy to see that Lee is kind of, the Marines are not going to be what he wanted. And he starts looking, that's when he starts looking overseas. He starts looking at Albert Schweitzer, applies to Albert Schweitzer. He's gotten his GED, and he gets his GED, by the way. He gets his GED in Japan because he had not officially gotten a degree and finished high school. And, so he's kind of into an exit strategy by the time he gets back into the U.S. But he is, interestingly enough, once he decides to do something like that, he starts behaving. So when he's back in the U.S., his performance reviews go up. And actually, I think if I recall, he's like a 4.5 on a 5-point scale. It's just like when he was a truant in New York City, and the truant officer called him in and said, okay, either you straighten up or we're putting you long-term in this home. And he goes back to school and gets a social participation 5.0 review. If Lee can be whatever he wants to be at a given time. It's another thing. If he wants to behave, he can behave. If he doesn't care, he doesn't care.
So let me ask you this. So do you think his early discharge, was orchestrated between him and his mother to try to get him out of there?
The reason I don't think so is he started sending her money. Now, Lee is notoriously cheap. I mean, that's just an established fact. Ask Marina, and she would tell you that. But he's actually, when he did not know that she had been injured until he went back on leave and found out that she'd been injured and that she was actually getting, you know, pay because she had been in court. She had had to get a doctor to sign. So I would say at that point in time, he was actually convinced that she needed some help. However, I think after a couple of months, I think Lee thinking himself about it's kind of like, well, I'm not excited about this. Let's just go for an early discharge. And he had already applied for college. He was already going. He was already listed to go to college like a year spring session from. And actually, by the time he got his discharge, it would have only been about 6 months off. But no, I don't think it was any particular ploy. I think it was situational at first. It might have been serious, and then he decided it's an opportunity.
Yeah, I think in the book, you stated, and I have this written down, by the time he got his early discharge, it was only 3 or 4 months before
Yeah,
his re-up. Right.
yeah,
So, and this had to do with uh, eventually his trip to Europe and Helsinki, and I have a couple questions on that. But he wouldn't have been able to go over there if he was still uh, possibly being able to call up, because I believe he was in a reserve unit at that
right.
point,
He
right?
was
So
right,
it,
and the
it,
key, yeah, the
yeah,
key point about that is he wouldn't have been able to go over there for any other reason, by the way,
except
that
education.
unless he educational. That's what he had to list for the purpose of his travel, which he did. So
Mhm. Yeah,
do I think Lee was scamming the system about the college? I don't know. In all honesty, he could have been. He's pretty creative. He knows how to play the game. But I do think it may well have been. The interesting thing is, when he originally applied for college, it's like a year away, and he's not put in for an early discharge or anything like that. He's going to have to serve out his jury duty, and there'd be
yeah,
like 3 or 4 months difference.
yeah.
But
And he told
once,
Delgado about that as
yeah,
well, right?
yeah. But once his mother, once that opportunity presents itself, it kind of looks like he jumped at it and decided to go ahead and see, like, advance his schedule and go ahead and get out. He was getting out. There's no doubt he was not going to renew, and quite frankly, with his record, I don't know that he would have been encouraged uh, to renew for another hitch.
Yeah, yeah. Two court martials. But actually, that's a great segue into my next question, because do you think that when he was discharged from his early discharge to go visit his mom, that he had talked to Nelson Delgado about going to Albert Schweitzer College and studying philosophy, I think it was.
Mhm.
Do you think he knew then that he was going to go to Russia?
No, I don't think so. I think that was a situational decision on his part. I think he really would have enjoyed going to college. Um, that's the sort of thing he wanted to do. He wanted to write about geopolitics. He wanted to write about American life and Russian life. And in his own writings and in his own remarks to other people, he talked about wanting to be a writer and have experiences that he could write about. Um, and provably by 1962, 63, he was writing. Now, there's some handicaps with his writing, but that's what he wanted to do, and he wanted to write about those subjects. That's consistent with all his reading. That's consistent with all his writing. You probably noticed the part with one of his commanding officers talking about, Lee would get into geopolitical discussions, and the officer was a graduate of an Eastern University and poli sci, and it's
Great,
like,
right? Yeah.
yeah, this is embarrassing because this guy knows as much as I do. We don't want to do that in front of the troops, and Jack said he interviewed guys who said Oswald liked doing that. Oswald liked showing up officers on points that he knew more about than they did. So,
Yeah, he was a
well,
know-it-all.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was a know-it-all about those things, the things that he wanted to know about. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when do you think, because he goes back to uh I think it's Fort Worth, right? And visits Marguerite for a few days. He gives her $100, which today is like a little more over a grand. He then tells her he's going to New Orleans to get a job, and then books fare to Europe
Yeah.
for $220. I believe it was to France, which, easy math, about $2,500. So this is, $2,500 trip, a grand to his mother. Not small payments here. When did he think he decided or pivoted to go to Russia instead of Albert Schweitzer College?
Well, first of all, I think by the time that he left Japan, he was saving his money. He
Yeah.
wasn't going out. Everybody's like, Oswald just stays in the barracks and reads. He's saving his money because at first he's going overseas to college, right? So he is accumulating money. He knows he needs to do that. I think he had decided, I think he had decided by the time he got discharged that he was going to go ahead and I think at that point in time, my best guess is he wanted to see Russia. I think he was thinking he would go see Russia, come back, and go to college in Switzerland. Not come back to the US, but come back from a tourist, weeks in Russia, see what it was like, and come
Mhm.
back to college in Switzerland. But, you know, I think that might have been what he was thinking by, spring or something like that. But when you look at the letter that he writes to his mother and to his brother, as he's leaving for Russia, he's decided he's going to try to get into Russia.
Yeah, he
Uh,
tells Robert to never
yeah,
contact him again.
yeah. So
He
he's made
says,
up his mind. By the time he gets on that boat, he is going to very much try to get into Russia.
hmm, it's fascinating. And
And he has the money. I mean, he has money. He has money enough to do it. I mean, he
yeah,
doesn't.
same
Yeah,
though.
it's
Yeah, yeah,
doable.
I like this because it's a logical explanation for things, and instead of just going the easy route and saying, "Well, he was recruited by the CIA to infiltrate Russia as a spy and all this jazz." But when you stop to think about Oswald and who he is and why he does what he does, what you're saying, Larry, makes a whole lot more sense. It may not be as intriguing or as sparkly as being, this big CIA secret spy, but
Right.
it does make sense. Once you understand how Oswald thinks and maybe the meaning behind some of what he's doing and why he's doing it, um, it does make a whole lot of sense. You know,
And I think the problem is that, and I've admittedly, it was a problem for me too. I think we got used to looking to Oswald from the outside and trying
right?
to find things on Oswald rather than looking at Oswald from the inside. And people took slices of Oswald at different points in times, and it was mysterious. It's much less mysterious when you look at Oswald in toto, and look at the areas of consistency and is he a bright guy? Yeah. Is he an ass at times? Yeah. Can he be difficult? Yeah. Uh, is he committed to his geopolitical view? Absolutely. That's one thing that's consistent, and he will argue with anybody at any time about that. I think one of my fun things is finding DeMorenschil commenting that actually the reason he kept hanging with Oswald and visiting with him was he enjoyed how combative Oswald was and how committed to geopolitical issues he was, because DeMorenschil's own son, he sounds like he considered him kind of a wuss. not a deep thinker. Like, okay, he just repeats what he's told. Oswald's more interesting than my son is, and it's funny because the son really disliked Oswald, and the dad really liked Oswald, which I thought was kind of a corroboration. It's like this the son actually let Oswald and Marina live with them for a few days at one point in time, was complaining about Oswald, and dad's going, well, okay.
Yeah, one thing we looked at a couple shows ago, Larry, was we kind of looked at Oswald's library reading list, and we were going through all of the books that he was mowing through in 1963, and it's a fairly consistent pattern of him checking out 3 or 4 books on a rotating basis and returning them all within 2 weeks, which really, puts forth, I think some of his early reading was a lot more geopolitically driven with biographies on, like, Mao Zedong and the Berlin Wall and all this other stuff. And then, of course, later in 1963, it changes more towards like Aldous Huxley and Ian Fleming and all of this stuff. And one thing that we came across, Larry, when we were looking at the Warren Commission report, that actually had where it broke down when he checked these books out and when he was returning them. We did find an anomaly in here, Larry. We wanted to get what you thought about it.
Yeah, I have it up. I have it up now, Rob.
Okay. Yeah. So on the right side, Larry, if you look up,
there are 4 books on the 19th. Yep.
Yeah, he had checked out 4 books on the 19th and returned, let's see, 4 books.
Hold
Hold on, Joe, go back.
I know. I miss.
Yeah. The return date on these books, Larry, is October 3rd, 1963. Now, we know that Oswald was not supposed to be in New Orleans on October the 3rd, 1963. So do you have an answer for this, or an explanation, or an idea of what is going on here?
Well, first of all, it seems to me that Oswald exited New Orleans, well, mysteriously. I won't say mysterious. Oswald exited New Orleans in a way that we don't understand. I'm not satisfied at all with his departure from New Orleans. I'm absolutely convinced that there were people in contact with him in New Orleans, and I guess the point is, I can absolutely see him being offered a ride, offered a flight, or whatever, to get out of New Orleans, and leaving stuff with them. I don't put it out of the idea that he left books with him to check in. I just don't, because you don't have to check them in. You just dump them in the book collection thing outside the library. It's not like you have to interact with the library. Uh, as a matter of fact, one of the questions that raises is it even possible that Oswald had put them in a book drop and they didn't get processed and checked in for some time? My wife's librarian, are there holidays? Did they just, is it coincidence? It could be mysterious. Somebody could have done it for him, or it could have just been that he put them in a drop. Sometimes the libraries have remote drops, local libraries, and he could have even put them in a book drop other than the library where he checked them out, and they had to get processed. I don't know, just guess on my part. But I will say, I am of the opinion that we have a very poor idea of what was happening with Oswald, and I do not trust the official story from New Orleans to Mexico City, and I certainly can't solve it, and I don't know how we're going to. I just want to be real honest about that. I am, as you see in the book, I am not absolutely. I wouldn't be shocked if I found that Oswald not only left books with somebody, like check those in, but hey, take care of my rifle. Like, okay, fine.
Maybe Judy returned his books for him.
I think I'm going to go with my library Dropbox thing. But
Yeah. So Larry, we knew you were going to come on for part two, and we've done a couple shows kind of leading up and going into Oswald. And one of the ones we did a few weeks ago that Rob mentioned was going into his library books and what he took out. And was there any pattern? Was the books he were taking out, did it get more radical from April, May, June, all the way up to September, right? Did it get more radical? We actually kind of found the opposite.
More science
But
fiction and
exactly.
action adventure.
yeah, so
Well,
I'm bringing that up on the screen, and we ended up putting this in order, which took a long time, but it was very interesting because Oswald was almost never late on returning a book. Obviously, going to his frugality. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Frugalness?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Frugality?
Frugality. Yeah.
Okay. You know what I mean? So he did return these books, four of them, on October 3rd, 63, which would be after he would have been in Mexico City. And that, to your point, did he get someone else to return them? Uh, we don't know. We just
We were
kind of
thinking
stuff.
that would be a big ask of, and we don't really know of any of his New Orleans
No.
friends that would do that. Like
Although,
And it's not in the
when,
way. It's not in the way, Larry. I mean, you're going out of your way to go to New Orleans from Mexico City.
when is Marina gone? When is she out
it's
of New Orleans?
I believe,
24th.
yeah, late September. Yeah.
Late September. Okay, so it would have to be setting somewhere or left them with someone, and then the
Or-
question is, why would you wait? You know,
Right.
uh, what? And the question was he really gone from New Orleans? And I have to raise this, and you've probably seen it from the book so far. David and I, one of the things that we did, I think, was a good bit different. We dug more into his interaction with the FBI, I think, quite frankly, than anybody has done. And one of our questions, two big questions. First of all, Oswald repeatedly lied to the FBI in New Orleans, big time. He asked to meet with them. He told them several lies about the FPCC and what can only be considered a covert clandestine group. Their names aren't public. Their leader, only name that anybody knows, is Heidel. They meet privately in houses. They don't have public meetings. Meetings are not announced in advance. I mean, this looks clandestine to the FBI. It has to. And he gives them certain documents and certain pieces of paperwork that would support that story. This is an out and out lie, a federal crime in two senses. He's provided information and he's given documents. He could have been locked up for that. And the FBI didn't particularly like him anyway,
Because
so
they had interviewed him in Dallas when he returned from Russia, right? That
yeah,
wasn't the first
John,
time we talked to him.
yeah.
yeah,
Well, actually, three
John
times in
Frank.
Dallas, up to the point where he wasn't very cooperative, but finally they met with him personally and he said, okay, fine. If anybody, a communist or subversive, contacts me, I'll report it. Now, interestingly enough, that's somewhat as if he appears to be doing that in New Orleans, but it's all a lie. So he's gaming the FBI in New Orleans, and has really set himself up to be arrested and prosecuted. Um, it's pure speculation on our part. If I will say this, if the FBI had been performing according to practices, they would have listed Oswald as a potential provisional subversive informant. He should have been a PSA because he's offered them information. As a matter of fact, they should have been working with him actively to put these guys under surveillance. And as it turns out, they do. They go after Heidel and this FPCC group in a big way. What they don't do is go after Oswald in a big way. The surveillance they do and the inquiries they do are on Heidel for the better part of a month. and they're leaving Oswald alone. Was this Oswald's idea? I don't know, but
Well,
I
they let
will
the
tell you,
students do it.
yeah, well, I will tell you by the end of August, Oswald has every reason to be nervous about the FBI. Oswald would have every reason, at some point they're going to catch up to this and they're going to call him in and say, Mr. Oswald, there is no Heidel. Why did you lie to us? And you do realize that's a federal crime, do you not? So he has every reason to lay low, go undercover. Maybe he's still in New Orleans. I don't know that he's not still. I'm totally unsure of this timeline. What I am sure of is that by the time Oswald gets to Mexico City, where I'm pretty convinced he was, he has every reason to be concerned about the FBI because he has lied to these people, and they should not be happy with it. You don't lie to Hoover's FBI and think that they're just going to say, "Oh, no harm, no foul."
Right.
Yeah, and it's so funny you said that, Larry, because in your chapter 1 viewpoints, perfect segue here. I had a couple questions because you talked a lot about how certain FBI documents were either retyped in the case of Lee's personal notebook, or leads not being followed up on. And one of the things you explored was whether Oswald was a PSI, personal source of information, or a paid informant, right? And of course, everyone after the assassination was running for cover, right? And that's CIA, FBI, right? We know that. But you have some interesting anomalies here with, hold on, let me read my small notes.
With Mr. DeBury's, for one thing, out of New Orleans.
Yeah, also. And so John Fain did his initial FBI debriefing, right? And he was kind of standoffish with them, right? And then when he was arrested after the fracas, he requested an FBI agent, and I'm blanking on his name.
Quigley.
Quigley. Thank you, sir. And you had talked a lot about how a lot of the FBI agents, Hosty, they had a kind of like a salesman, a quota, right? To uh, to get confidential informants or personal sources of information on their payroll, for lack of a better term. And that's kind of how they were judged. And why did Oswald not show up in a lot of these? And I think that's where William Walther comes in when he says that he saw one of the documents that said Lee could have been a personal source of information, but the way it goes, and I used to run a sales team, and when you open an account and they're like, oh, I'll think about it. You're not filling out all the information, right? You give one document, you need verbal notice. I'm trying to get this guy as a source of information, but it doesn't have to be corroborated with other FBI documents. And that's might have what happened there. But
Yeah, I would say Walther. I totally believe Walther. And one of the reasons I totally believe him is there should have been. I mean, this is one of those cases of, the classic, what should be there that isn't there. If they were following regular protocols and practices, there should have been a subversive file on Oswald. How could there not be? This guy is offering info. It's like he's offering information to the FBI, and he's offering information that is bogus. They don't know that yet, but for a time, there absolutely should have been a file. Now, does it stay there forever? I don't think they had resolved their issues with Oswald even by the time he got back to Dallas. The New Orleans file had just gotten to Dallas, and we never get a dialogue on, what's Dallas going to do about the fact that we now know he lied to New Orleans? We never, all of that is, it's out there in the field offices, in soft files on somebody's desk. It's not in the headquarters file. And one of the things we did discover is there are real disconnects between what's in the headquarters file on Oswald and what's out there in the field, because it looks like somebody, you never have the original, like we don't have the original interview notes with Oswald in New Orleans. We just have what they reported, after the fact. So in any event, yeah, I would, but to sum all of this up, back to your question, Rob, I have every reason to think Oswald was concerned about the FBI and concerned about how they might follow up on him, and might have been lying low and on the way out of New Orleans, because at some point in time they're going to come after him. They would have come after him in New Orleans and held him to account. The other thing that really kind of gets me whenever I look at that list that you put up, I was reading most of those same books that same year. Both the James Bond books and the science fiction. It's like I was not as erudite as Oswald in some of the higher level books he was reading, although I thought I was pretty smart at the time. But it's kind of like everybody was reading the James Bond books. You got them and you read it in 2 hours and you're done, and you go on to the next Bond book. But I think since we talked about books, I think one of the things that captures Oswald and how different he was at his age and at his time. In the Marine files, one of the Marines' questions said, when we were on the troop ship to Japan, Oswald is reading a book called Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, which this Marine had no idea. It's like, is it a botany book or whatever? But, Oswald was, I would say, reading way above. But then Oswald is also, he reads science fiction. He reads, James Bond. So he can go either direction. He can read for just entertainment. One of the things you brought up, Rob, I think that has changed, though, the difference between 63 and earlier years is much of what he's reading in 63 is magazines. He has subscriptions to a lot of magazines. He has subscriptions to, national political magazines. He has subscriptions to the Militant, Socialist Worker, and he's reading. And how do we know this? He may not have had subscriptions to some of these, but when his stuff is collected from his personal belongings, he has a number of shooting and hunting magazines. And he's always liked guns. I mean, there's no, Alba's description of his behavior in New Orleans is right. He would always be reading gun magazines. So he is not one dimensional. He really is. But again, it kind of reminds me a little bit of myself in 1963. Did we have gun magazines around the house? You bet we did. Did we have all sorts of rifles around the house? You bet. This is not unusual for someone raised at the place and time he was raised.
Right.
Yeah. And just one more question to follow up on that. So the FBI had retyped one page of Lee's personal notebook, and I guess that was to remove the reference to the Hosty Marina contact in October, maybe.
No, that's in. Well, no, that's when he's back in Dallas. Yeah, late October, right? Yeah. So he's back in Dallas, and they visit the Paynes and talk with Marina, and that's what was removed. That contact was removed.
Right. So that goes
his license plate number and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes along with the fact that Oswald, in a letter written shortly after that, Oswald and Marina are both writing the Soviet embassy about going back to Russia. Okay. But Oswald complains to them that the FBI is even trying to get Marina to defect. And they're harassing him. They're trying to get Marina to defect. He's really trying to sales pitch, right? But that's not unlike what he said in the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, when he goes all drama queen and, does his act there and says, I'm afraid for my life. The FBI is after me. Well, no doubt the FBI would have been after him. It's, they're a little slow. But one of the things we don't understand, Stu and I learned this when we were working on the MLK assassination, is we always thought that the FBI was like this super well organized organization, and they weren't. I mean, they were compartmentalized down. Each office ran its own business. And did they advise headquarters? Yeah, they're pretty good about that because Hoover would be all over them. Did they advise other offices? Sometimes, and much more slowly. It's like, their priority is looking good to headquarters, and if they have something that might be of interest to someone, they'll get it out there eventually.
Well, one other thing I wanted to touch on about Mexico City. I mean, because it's like you said, Larry, it's all over the place. But there is one thing that always intrigued me, and it's from that book, Passport to Assassination. And it's the scene where they describe Oswald coming into the Russian embassy with a pistol and, threatening to kill himself and being in hysterics, tears, and this whole scene is like, when I first read it in that book, I was like, this sounds totally made up. But I was just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's a point of continuity. By itself, I'm totally with you, Rob. But if in the long string of things, okay, Oswald inside Russia, Oswald has been called in. Yeah, Oswald has been called in to the tourist office and told he can't stay. He's going back. They give him a train ticket, and they tell him, your guide will pick you up at the hotel, and she's going to put you on this train because you are leaving. So what does he do? He times it perfectly. And this is drama. Just before she's supposed to be there and knock on the door, he goes in the bathtub and lightly slits his wrist so he's bleeding. Now, that's a pretty dramatic gesture, totally non-fatal. And if you look at the timing, and Ernst Titovitz had looked at it, it's like he knew when she was coming. She was scheduled to be there at a given time, and he stages this whole thing. So she's going to walk in and find this,
Yeah.
So,
and Larry, let me actually, I have a perfect little segment, a little screenshot from this exact event. The detailed saga of the interagency Russian dialogue. Wait, this might not be it. Hold on. Oh yeah, when Chirikova knocked on the door at the scheduled time on the 21st, she got no response, and ultimately Oswald was found in the bathtub with blood in the water and superficial cuts on his left wrist. Instead of a train trip out, he was to spend time in a hospital and be given a routine psychiatric interview. The wrist cutting appears to have been a dramatic gesture on Oswald's part in response to the total lack of interest in him on the part of the Soviets. It can be judged as a non-serious attempt at actual de-lifing, since he cut his wrist lightly only moments before the scheduled time of Chirikova's arrival. Oswald's action quickly turned him into a public relations problem for Russian officialdom. An American so enthralled with the Soviet system, he wanted to abandon the United States to join it, only to be rejected, and so distraught he had to be hospitalized. It was not a good, quote, look for the Soviet leadership and the Russian public relations. So
that's a little different than whipping out a pistol in a foreign country and in a Russian embassy.
I mean, well, if you think about it, though, what he did in Russia is essentially kind of throw himself onto the system, make the Russians responsible for what they were going to do. Ernst pulled a lot of the internal Russian documentation. At the highest levels, they considered this to be a major public relations issue. I mean, at the that this was, now think what would have happened. Oswald's seen this happen, right? He made it play and he made it work for himself in Russia. What would have happened if he had gone into the Soviet embassy in Mexico City and thrown himself on their mercy and they bought it? Okay, here we have an American system being persecuted by the Americans. He's being persecuted simply because he was our country. They're harassing him. This could have been a great PR story.
Mhm.
The embassy personnel didn't play it that way. They didn't contact headquarters. They contacted headquarters, but just to find out if Marina had something in process, which she did, but they didn't bite. So I guess, Rob, I agree with you. It's different, but I don't see it as inconsistent, and it had worked for him once. This is I consider Mexico City to kind of be a Hail Mary for Oswald. Like, can I convince the Cubans or Russians to let me go to, get, treat me special, let me go to Cuba, whatever, I'll send for Marina.
Mhm.
I see it as a Hail Mary because nothing else is working at that point in time. So an escalation, but it's not totally inconsistent. If you want to look at it that way, not the same level, but in New Orleans, what does he do? He sets up this big street demonstration. He's already teased the anti-Castro Cubans. He demonstrates only a few blocks away from where he's been, trying to fake them out and pretend he was something else. And so when Bringuier shows up, he immediately asks Bringuier to hit him. Like, okay, more
Yeah.
drama. And this is on TV. This is great. So I don't know. All I can say is I don't find it extremely inconsistent for Oswald because he can do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think the way it plays is with his letter to the Soviets after the fact, saying, I've been harassed. They're trying. That part seems to be consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Larry, so this is one of the questions I had in my book when reading. I'm only like 2/3 the way through, to be honest. But Oswald expected in Russia to be a big deal. The Soviets, unlike other defectors, did not use Oswald as propaganda. Also, when he got back from the Soviet Union, uh, he was also ignored, right? He was expecting media to show up in New York City and then in Dallas. Uh, and it, why did no one, including Russia, including the United States, which we know based on Oswald's writings when he came back, were very anti Soviet, right? The system. Um, the Americans didn't use that as propaganda, nor did the Soviets use him as propaganda like they did with other defectors. Why?
The Soviets are a little bit easier to understand. First of all, uh, there's a profile for who the Soviets used. The profile that they used, if you had actually truly defected to the Soviet Union and said, you gave up your citizenship and you brought them information that was useful, and I give some examples in the book. There, for example, over a
The
period of time, there had been people working for the NSA in foreign countries that realized that the US was tapping and collecting information on those countries and felt that that was very wrong and went to Russia and proclaimed that to the world with some very specific incidents. That makes good propaganda. They put them on TV. They put them, and made big deals about that when they had something executable to say, like they had actual details that they could cite in the news story that would make the US look bad in front of another country. Egypt, Britain, especially in Europe. NSA people,
but
American
could they
intelligence
not have
people.
done that with Oswald and the just being at Atsugi? Could they not have spun
He
that
didn't.
in?
There's nothing that he really had. What you needed is a story that made the Americans look bad in front of another country. This is foreign propaganda. It's not propaganda against the U.S. It's foreign propaganda. Oswald did nothing in Japan of special significance. It's interesting, and that they could have used. There's nothing that he did that would have embarrassed the U.S. and Japan. Uh, Jack actually makes a point in his book, and this is something that Oswald either did not know or did not offer, whatever, that there was a team of Marines stationed at Tsugi to do atomic weapons work, and they worked on weapons on the ships, and it was in a highly compartmentalized area. That would have been great. That's the sort of thing that Russia would have loved to have. Oswald didn't give it to him or didn't know about it, or whatever. But other than that, there's nothing else really that he had that would have would have been news, or nothing that would have embarrassed the U.S. to Japan, because that's the real propaganda. Um, when Oswald came back to the U.S., the problem was Oswald had spoken out against the U.S. when he entered Russia. Okay, you know, and he'd not really said anything, had not been covered in the paper since. So when he comes back, um, you know, all we have is he's not a big story. By the
He's
time he gets
yeah.
back to Dallas, Fort Worth, and starts writing and expressing his dissatisfaction in his manuscript and his monographs about the Russian system, um, it's all there's nobody there to check him out. However, interestingly enough, so he's not a media deal, I guess is what I'm saying. If he had been gone to the radio and TV and said, I want to speak out against Russia, and the communist system, but he didn't. He didn't do that. He actually just started writing. The
But didn't
interesting
he
thing
have
is,
two sets of statements, like one pro Russia, one negative Russia in returning?
I'm sorry.
In his
I'm sorry.
writings.
In his writing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he didn't reach it. He was expecting the media to come to him, which actually, interestingly enough, David found in the Dallas police archives a couple of letters where the local media wrote to Oswald very sympathetically. Now, we think it was maybe a trick, but they're writing to Oswald praising him for his open-mindedness and his, you know, sense of, well, I want to go look and see for myself. Mr. Oswald, we want to praise that. We think that's commendable. He didn't get back to them for whatever reason. But so he didn't even respond to that. But in all honesty, at that point in time, he was just desperate to find a job. I mean, so Oswald's first 3 or 4 months back in the U.S. they bounce around. He's got to find a place to live. He's got to find a job. Uh, he's got a young child. He's trying to satisfy Marina. Marina keeps Marina
Yeah.
keeps fending him off, being more attracted to the Russians who are trying to give her things than they have for Lee, who is not delivering anything. It was a very complex and chaotic time for Lee. But I thought it was interesting in that there were local media people who actually tried to do what you're talking about, Joe. It kind of prompt him to speak out, and at that point, for whatever reason, he didn't respond. Later on, when in New Orleans, when he went to address the Jesuit college, he did speak out, but that was much later.
Mhm. Yeah, and kind of consistent with with after he got the job at the TSBD and he got the call back for the job. I don't know, was it at the airport as moving luggage? And they called Ruth Payne, and I think this is a big topic on the Ed Forum these days.
Yes.
He he didn't really respond, and it's not that Ruth didn't tell him or not, and I'm not sure about that, but it's just consistent with Oswald's character. He didn't follow up on things. He didn't follow up on the Albert Schweitzer College application. That's the last time they heard from him.
It just follows up on what he's interested in at the time. If it's not on his radar, it's very personal. And he did. There's an interesting remark, I think, because this offer as a baggage handler. I mean, two things right off. Oswald got a job at the school book depository. We don't really know what Oswald thought that consisted of. He did make a remark to Ruth or Marina one. I forget. It's like it would be kind of interesting to work around books. This is an Oswald thing, but
Yeah.
the job at the airport was manual labor. And that's all he had had for almost 2 years. And he was really fed up with manual labor. So did he choose just not? I'm not going to respond. I've already got a manual labor job. I don't need another manual labor job. Um, we do know that he continued to look for work while he was at the TSPD later on. He did go on at least one more employment interview for a non-manual labor job. And one of the things that has to be noted in terms of his character is he continually, when he would go to the unemployment office, when he would be tested, he would be tested and rated very well on appearance, manner, speaking ability, written test, and they kept writing down that he was being employed way below his level, that he could even be considered for a management level job or a staff level position, but he would tell them, I have to have a job tomorrow because I need money. And they always had to immediately fast track place him with whatever they had available in manual
And
labor.
didn't they feel bad too that they couldn't
They
place
felt
him
bad.
on?
They did feel bad about it. And I think one of the things that this whole world might have changed if he actually was being accepted for a job after his arrival back in Dallas at another photography company. And this shocked me. And it's actually in the Warren Commission. They interviewed him and they were going to hire him. But just by raw chance, they did a background check and they called Jagger Stovall and talked to a manager there. And the manager said, oh, he's okay, but he just made the remark that occasionally he made fellow workers nervous because he would speak Russian. And like in 1963, Dallas, Texas, that's a kiss of doom. And so he doesn't get the job. Well, what if he'd actually got another photographic studio job? When he went to Mexico, he listed his profession as photography. And Oswald, one thing that David and I found when we started looking in the Dallas police archives, when they started going through his personal belongings, Oswald was a photographic freak. He took photographs of everything, everywhere, all the time. It's so bad that when it starts out in the series of evidence photos, they're showing, 2 or 3 photos close up. Then a little bit later, they're showing 20 photos spread out on a desk. And then later, they're just showing a photo album, like open, like the police got tired. Like, okay, he had a lot of photos. We did it. Okay. But he was a pack rat. It is amazing to me. He carried receipts and letters and correspondence around. And, there's a big paper trail that somebody, but there was nothing incriminating in any of it. It's just, does he have his receipts? Yeah, he has his receipts. Oswald was obsessive in that fashion. He has receipts and photos. You keep wondering, like, okay, did you pack all this stuff? But I guess you never knew, or he never knew when he was going to need it for job applications or whatever. He carried a lot of it to Mexico City, a list of stuff that he carried to Mexico City to show the Cubans to prove his resume as being a Cuban activist. So he had that. He just went back and, okay, let me sort it out and I'll take on the stuff to prove my case.
Wow.
So let's talk a little bit more about that day in Dallas, Larry. It starts off with, of course, Lee leaving Marina, allegedly with some money and a wedding ring, right? Or his wallet or whatever it is they say. Talk to us a little bit about Oswald's behavior that day when it comes to,
Sure.
why he wasn't outside watching the parade, maybe.
Why is it
Why?
so strange? Why is it anomalous? What
Yeah.
is going on here? Yeah, it is. And I want to be clear for anybody looking at this. David and I try to do this. Up to now, this book, Oswald Puzzle, is 2 books. About 2/3 of it is a biography. Okay. About 1/3 of it from this point on is speculation. It's a scenario that we think is right. I'm not going to assert that I can prove it. It's just a scenario about it's our assessment. So I don't want to oversell it. But
Well, you're in the right place because we love speculation here. But we do both.
What I think was happening with Oswald, what we think happened that week, Oswald had been in contact with some of these same people for months that he originally gotten into contact with in New Orleans. We'll call them the mystery Cubans from Miami. Okay. When they got to Sylvia Odio's, they were the mystery Cubans from New Orleans because they had just come from New Orleans, but originally they'd come from Miami. Okay. So these guys had been in contact with Oswald for 3 months before this time, doing things like visiting Robert McCowan, a noted Cuban arms salesperson, trying to buy. Now you gotta think about this. They try to buy a large number of rifles for a revolution in Central America. Now think about what that really says to Lee Harvey Oswald. This guy, what was this guy who's with you and you're going along with? Is the United States set to do major revolutions in Central? No, we're trying to stop that. We don't like those revolutions. It's Castro that's trying to do that. So we think that's a piece of evidence that someone is managing Oswald to make him think that these particular Cubans are pro-Castro, and that he is being quietly and silently demonstrating his commitment to the revolution and the fact that he's willing to go along and do things to support the revolution. He wants to, you mentioned it, Joe, there's every evidence that he wants to go to Cuba and be there in a bigger fashion than he did to Russia. He wants to be accepted. He wants to be respected. He wants to be part of the revolution. He wants to be not treated like he was in Russia. Just get a factory assignment or something like that out in the sugarcane fields. So, then we go on to Sylvia Odio, and we're talking about he's being set up by these guys. Not, it's like a legend is being created for Lee Harvey Oswald. I can't say that at first. What we speculate is that it may have been operating at two levels. One is to generate a propaganda legend that could be used in an actual sanctioned propaganda campaign to illustrate how easily a naive, intelligent American veteran could be recruited. This is great propaganda work. However, underneath that and overlaid on it at some point in time, and you see it at Sylvia Odio's when the call back to Sylvia is not with Oswald present, okay, talking about Oswald as the shooter. We think whatever happened is happening at two levels, and Oswald is being stolen for the conspiracy, or at least considered for the conspiracy, because by that time Dallas is in play as a place to attack the president. And how do we know that Lee Harvey Oswald would be in Dallas? Lee Harvey Oswald has a baby that's going to be born within 2-3 months. He's going to be in Dallas. That's quite clear. You don't have to work to put him there. Nature is going to take its course. So I think what happened is over a period of time, he was conditioned by these people. He began to trust them because they were telling him things he wanted to hear. They were giving him an opportunity that he wanted. I've said in other venues, the easiest way to run a con is to run a con against a mark that wants what you want. That's the way this works best. Is you don't want to do something different than what they normally do. You don't want to give them, they already want to, that they want to do something, and you just build your con around them. In this case, I build a manipulation around what Oswald wanted to do, which was to go to Cuba and join the Cuban regime. And hopefully it works out better than the Russian thing did. Okay. We know from Marina that he had been talking about that in New Orleans. He was even talking in New Orleans that he was so desperate to do it, maybe he should hijack an airplane. And by the Marina, if I get a pistol, will you help me? And Marina said, "You're an idiot. No, of course I won't help you, you jerk. Yeah, but if you manage to get there and send for me, I might come." Okay, fine. So I think to answer your question, Rob, by that week in Dallas, he's torn two directions. He's got this people offering him an option about Cuba. He's got a new baby and a family there that he would like to get back together. He's torn. And he goes to visit Marina, and what happens? Marina says, look, Lee, and he goes on a Thursday, right? And that's different. That is anomalous. And Marina essentially pushes back. And she makes it clear that she did push back and say, look, you still don't have an apartment. You get an apartment, you get a washing machine. I got a brand new baby. I got diapers, right? Okay. We do not have Pampers in 1963. We got lots of diapers. We got two little kids. You get me an apartment, you get a washing machine, we'll talk, you know? And so Oswald's got to make a choice. People have told him that the next day they've got it set up so that he can fly out of Dallas and go to Cuba. And Marina, who knows? If she had just said, okay, I'll move in with you tomorrow, what would have happened? We don't know. Pure speculation. But it looks like he had to make a choice, and it looks like he made the choice of taking the Cuban option. We know all of this is supported by the Ray January Redbird Airport story that earlier that week, a young couple had come in and tried to lease an aircraft or rent an aircraft for a long distance flight. They were talking about the Yucatan. Don't know who flies to the Yucatan from, Dallas, but Ray January was a little suspicious. He said after they asked so many questions about the fuel capacity and how far it came, I thought they were planning to hijack the darn plane to Cuba. Well, then he saw someone waiting in the car, not listening directly, watching the conversation, not hearing it, that he later, after the assassination, felt was Lee Harvey Oswald. And we think that was part of a con game against Oswald to convince him that they had this thing set up and to convince him that they were going to fly him out of Dallas. Did they ever intend to take him to the airport? I doubt it. They intended to kill him in the process and plant information on him, tying him very closely to Fidel Castro. One of the reasons we think that is that the night of the assassination, these same people, exactly the same people by name, give the names in the book, called Claire Booth Luce, whose husband ran the Time Life media network and in a heartbeat could do any story he wanted to do, called her and told her that they had had Lee Harvey Oswald under surveillance for months. They had monitored him traveling to Mexico City, and they were prepared to offer information that he had come back to Dallas with a Cuban assassination team, which had just killed the president. If that story had gotten into Life magazine the next week, it would have been awful hard to avoid a war with Cuba and possibly Russia.
So in this scenario, are we thinking, because Oswald would have to be really, really naive to think that if he killed Kennedy, if it was him up there on the 6th floor taking these shots, that he would somehow get this magical ticket to Cuba and be welcomed with open arms by Castro as the guy who killed Kennedy. I mean,
oh yeah, that's insane. He's smarter than that. It has nothing to do with JFK. It can't have anything to JFK other than, again, speculative. If I were telling him this story, I would say it's great that we do it today because all the attention will be on the president and nobody will care about this little airplane flying out of Redbird Airfield, and we'll be gone and done, before the president is even out of town. Right? It can't have any. Oswald is not stupid. He can't think that he's going to kill JFK and get a ticket to Cuba and arrive, shortly before the nuclear weapons do.
Yeah, because I always think, the rifle was, of course, ordered in the name of A.J. Heidel, right? And that's the weapon that's found in the depository. That's the name that's attached to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans. And it could always, if they did enough digging, tie it back to Lee Oswald. And maybe he thought that they couldn't tie it back to him. But of course, his P.O. box gives it away, but maybe he thought that, it couldn't be tied back to him.
But
But
he wouldn't know about the rifle. He doesn't know about anything. That all he knows is he's going to fly out to Cuba. He doesn't. I'm glad you pointed out, because we've argued about all of this forever. And the point is, if a rifle traceable to Lee Harvey Oswald, without his knowledge, is recovered from the Texas School Book Depository, two things. I don't care if Lee Harvey Oswald had actually been standing out in front and been photographed. Oswald would be connected to the assassination. And if Oswald said, "Oh, well, I just lent this rifle to my buddies," he's still part of a conspiracy. That the rifle does the deal. The rifle traceable to him and to Heidel, who has a resume as a Cuban activist, right? Seals the deal. That's all you really need, is to have that rifle recovered, maybe some ammo recovered, and you're done. It's over. He's never going to get out of that. Nobody's ever going to buy it, which is the argument to me, of course, is yes, he did buy that rifle, and is he traceable to that rifle? Because you don't do this and make up this whole rifle story after the fact. You need to have it, it needs to be real, because that's all you got.
Yeah, Larry, what do you think was Lee's expectation if and when he got to Cuba? It's not going to be like Russia. He's not going to get some, cushy apartment and have all these Cuban girls throwing themselves.
Actually, he would. That there had been a series of aircraft hijackings, and I actually write about that in the book, of activists who'd hijacked commercial airliners even and gone to Cuba, and they got great receptions. They were treated as regime heroes, because they would all step out of the plane and take the opportunity. It's not like arriving in Russia by train, right? And meeting your tourist guide. You're landing at the airport. You demonstrated your total commitment to the Cuban Revolution. You're prepared to talk about, quite frankly, you're prepared to talk about what's bad about America and what's bad about Russia. And in 1963, Fidel Castro was more than happy for you to talk about what's bad about Russia, because Fidel Castro is talking to JFK just about the fact of kicking the Russians out and becoming neutral in this new dialogue that starts on November 22nd. So, yeah, Oswald, who knows what he would build? Who knows what they told him? Who knows what they promised him? Remember, these are Cubans who are portraying themselves as Cuban intelligence assets, Cuban supporters, recruiting an American, an ex-veteran, with some history, and a street activist, to commit to join the revolution.
I like it. I like
double defector. I mean, those are not common.
So, and Oswald is, well, again, I don't think he expected to arrive there alive. Okay, that's my speculation. It's better to have him framed and dead with even more. But in his own mind, Oswald has been leafleting. He's been speaking. He's been on radio. He's been on TV. He does have a resume of endorsing the revolution. He's very informed about the revolution. He's been reading The Militant. He's been reading the, all the publications.
Since 59 with Delgado, I think, or 58 even. Right.
But he's up on his story. I mean, I guess that's what my point is. He would be quite well spoken upon arrival why the Cuban, in his own mind, why he could present. He just tried to sell his story to the Cubans in Mexico City, and they said, we got to follow the rules. Now, if he thinks if I can get on Cuban TV and give him this same story, it'll be great. As a matter of fact, he said in something he wrote that, or actually, I think he told Marina, it didn't work in Mexico City because they're a bunch of bureaucrats. And that's when he got in the fight with Askew and the consulate. It's kind of like, you people are just, you won't listen to my commitment. You won't listen to me. You're abandoning your revolution and people who want to support you. And Askew is going, it's paperwork, guy. I mean, and I think an interesting thing, which we do not know, we know that Sylvia Duran later, years later, uh, stated that his visa had been approved. His tourist visa to go to Cuba had actually been approved. And when she was asked whether or not, like, well, did you get back to him after the fact? Because you took his name, telephone number. Yeah, did you get back and inform him about that? She wouldn't say. We don't know that she didn't actually get back and say, oh, by the way, Lee, your visa's ready whenever you want to pick it up. We're good inside Cuba. This SOB that wouldn't let you in is, got kicked out and we're good, because she kind of liked Oswald. And it
Is
is,
her stuff still under lock and key with the HSCA?
no, it's not. The problem is, and this is where I drove myself nuts, it's not that anything is withheld, it's such they did a poor job of questioning her. In fact, that a lot of the stuff, it's like questioning the Tarasovs, the interpreters. They asked some good questions, but they didn't ask a sequence structured series of questions from point A to point B. There are gaps, kind of like that gap. So it's not that it's being withheld. The right questions were not asked. But to some extent, the questions we know enough to ask now, they didn't know to ask then. Lord only knows if we could get the Tarasovs and her back, and even in 1964, 1965, we could have resolved everything about Mexico City. But, that's just not what happened.
Man.
That is.
Hey, you got anything else, buddy?
Well, no, I mean, we. So I'm like 60%, maybe close to 2/3 through the book, and we didn't touch on a lot of the DRE stuff and Oswald and the Cubans and Miami, New Orleans. But what do you think of making David on the hook for that in the future?
Absolutely,
in a few weeks,
absolutely, because
and we hope he feels it.
that's what David found. I mean, the key part to the whole last third of the book, being able to draw a particular set of individuals in and timeline it, who knew what, when, to make what I just described happen. And now we know the real names and people. It's not that we're just talking about a high level scenario. I mean, John Martino said, oh, the thing blew apart when Oswald was arrested and the rest of the plot didn't happen. Yeah, okay, that would be a high level. No, he didn't get to the airplane. He didn't get, he got arrested instead. Now, with what David found, the fact that David found that when Lee Harvey Oswald was in court after being arrested and in jail for a day over the public annoyance, claim, that of the guys in the courtroom with them, the Cubans one of them was the brother of a senior propaganda political actions officer at JFK in Miami.
Ernesto?
Emilio in this case.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other guy is Sylvia Odio's uncle. Okay. Sylvia Odio, Guitart, is Sylvia Odio's uncle, who talks to Sylvia. They correspond. Sylvia, even Odio, admitted later on that they had talked about Oswald, afterwards, and she was asked, did you talk about before? And she kind of ducked that question. But everybody gossiped. Everybody was gossiping about Oswald. He's on radios and TV. If you're an anti-Castro person, this American that's suddenly coming out of nowhere supporting Fidel is, what are we going to talk about?
He's the talk of the town.
Yeah.
He's the talk of the town.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is David keeps talking about another individual named Frank Bartes, who was in the room at the same time. It was interviewed later by the FBI and ask if he'd ever heard of Oswald, and Bartis says, "Oh no, never heard of Oswald." It's like he was in the courtroom when Oswald was being arraigned. He lied. These people lied. So David is a great person. That's how this story really got flesh on the bones of how this scenario could have happened, starting in Miami. Who was there from Miami at the right time? Who could have contacted Oswald? Tied into, a fellow named Hernandez is the guy that McCowan remembers visiting with Oswald. Which Hernandez? Carlos? We can put names to these people now. We know Carlos was involved with gun running with McCowan, so he would have recognized him. Yeah, David is the person to talk about. How do we tie Miami to New Orleans and bring in this group of DRE? It's kind of like DRE/CIA associated Cubans, because DRE existed and was being paid, by the CIA to do anti-Castro propaganda. And the fact that Morley, in talking to them, said, I was amazed by this, that they were going, oh yeah, by August 1963, we already had a propaganda campaign underway with Oswald. It's like, this is the Oswald that nobody even knows in November, and you guys are already doing propaganda with him and writing congresspersons and, telling all the other exile groups about him.
And
Oswald was on everybody's radar.
First on the horn after the assassination,
Yeah. Yeah. And Hal Hendricks, Hal Hendricks is the first one to start after the assassination. If you call Scripps Howard, you get referred to Hal Hendricks, who is a longtime David Phillips propaganda asset, living in. My suspicion is that he was working on this whole propaganda campaign that was one of 3 different operations that were going on within the CIA around Oswald that Oswald was entirely clueless about.
Right. Unwitting.
That's why David and I use the word entangled. It's just like, I'm not saying but he had crossed so many lines and come to the attention of so many people. You go, well,
he got in over his head.
He got in over his head.
Is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Right.
When they found out what he wanted to do.
I'm sorry, whatever spy he thought he was in his head, he really just kind of bumped up against the wrong people. And I think they got him in
But he figured it out at the end, Joe, when he said, I'm just a patsy.
Yeah. I think he was beginning to figure it out that weekend. Yeah, I do. I do think at the time it was just dawning on him. I'm not even sure. It was only beginning to get to him how much trouble he was in by that just before he was killed. It was because he had no idea. He had no idea about the rifle. He had no idea about it. It's just, you look at the dialogue that we put in that he's talking to his brother, his wife, it's like, I'm okay. Well, Rob, you can listen, you can play the interviews with the, media in the hallway and that sort of stuff. And this guy is just kind of like, Lee Oswald can't disassemble that much. It's like, I don't even know why they're arresting me. Oh, well, they're arresting me because the only thing I can think of is I was in Russia and they're just picking up a Russian, And
you can see his emotions. You can see he's pissed off. You can see when he's at the midnight press conference, when he's like, when it seems like he has that light bulb moment, where he's like, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
You can see his emotions, his frustrations, his pissed, he's pissed off. But everything he says is like, I don't know why I'm here. I haven't done anything. I haven't shot anybody. The police have, harassed me, and it's because I live
the oh shit moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what we didn't want to put that in as a book title, but that
maybe the next one.
Yeah. But I'll let David have that.
There you go.
I cannot wait to read the last kind of third of the book. I think I'm on chapter 15 out of 23 or 17, 16. And, I was thinking of like skipping a couple chapters, but it's just so good,
Oh,
honestly.
don't do that.
So David's not getting off this easy. Of course, we hope he feels better, but maybe Rob and I will have him on and talk about the last third of the book, which kind of focuses on the Cuban angle
As Paul
and
Harvey says, the rest
and
of the
His
story.
story. And he
yeah,
knows all those names much better than I do. When we do interviews together, it's kind of like, okay, David, it's your turn. Who was that person? Like, okay, one of 50 different Cubans or JM Wave officers. He's in charge of remembering those names. That's his thing. So yeah, absolutely, I'm all for that.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Larry, for joining us tonight. And folks, again, the link is in the description if you want to check out the book, The Oswald Puzzle. Highly recommended. We love it. And thank you, Larry, for the advanced copies. We appreciate it. And excellent work, my friend. And it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And you're
It's
welcome
great to
back.
be back with you guys. Have a good weekend.
yes,
You too, Larry. Thank you
you
so much
too.
for hanging out
You
with
bet.
us and talking about your book.
Yeah, I think this book will end up on the Mount Rushmore of JFK books, and I'm not just saying that because you're on here, but we've been talking about this with our audience and kind of giving a slow, slow kind of, giving talking about Oswald in a different way for the past year since we met at Lancer 23, and our audience is really in tune with, I think, with the tone of the book, and I definitely suggest everyone who is listening to order it and follow the link in the description. It is
Now Jim DiEugenio can officially review it.
That should be fun. Oh, and by the way, thanks to all your viewers. I've been looking at the comments on the side, and I appreciate those. I really do. Thanks, everybody. And I'm happy with it. It's kind of like I do consider that it's a book I needed to do because, as we'd said before earlier, I like it. It needed to be done. I needed to go back to it, and I don't think I could have done back to it earlier. It's like I don't think I could have written this book before I did. We just really
right.
haven't. I won't say not all the information was there, but it can be there. But if your focus isn't right, then you'll miss it, which is what I was doing before. So okay.
Well, people have tried to write this book before, and I won't say they failed miserably, but I think it's also a matter of having all the information, like you just said. I mean, there's so much that comes out year after year after year after year. You can go all the way back to the mid '60s. They were trying to figure out Oswald, but I think you finally did it right, and you did us a good service for the research community. So thank you very much, Larry Hancock.
Yes,
All right.
you
Thanks
cannot.
again. See you
All right,
all
buddy.
later.
All right, we'll see you, Larry.
Have a great night. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. All right, Joe.
Dino.
And just like that, he's gone. Now we appreciate Larry. Apparently, Joe, because I didn't pick my phone up. He was having trouble getting in.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't that he was late or taking a nap. It says it's not letting me in. And then another message that says it cannot pair stream after it started. So I don't know what was going on, but I'm glad he finally got in.
Yeah. Well, we did a good job bullshitting for half an hour.
We flubbed our way through it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we did okay. Because we were not prepared for that whatsoever, folks. So we apologize for the first half hour of this show. It's been a bit of a week. It's been a bit of a day for your boy, for sure. And then to have, David cancel, and then Larry couldn't get in. We were freaking out. But I'm glad Larry was able to come, and of course he hit another home run on the Lone Gunman podcast, because that's what he does. He's the GOAT. And I mean, man, Go buy the book. Go buy the book. You won't regret it. It is full of goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, you can't be serious about researching the assassination if you don't read this book, in my opinion. I think it's going to end up, like I said, on the Mount Rushmore.
yeah,
Of
it's
JFK
changed
books.
my mind on a lot of things when it comes to thinking about Oswald and why he did some of the things that he did,
Yeah.
or why he didn't do some of the things that he was accused of doing. And when you super micro analyze someone's personality and life and movements and moments and thoughts and writing, and this is what you are left with. And I can honestly say that this book makes a lot of sense. And like I said, I wasn't lying when I said this book has been tried to be written before. Okay. I mean, look at Norman Mailer, Oswald's Game. This book has tried to be written before. And of course, that's a lone nut example. But there's
Yeah.
been plenty of conspiracy books that have tried to figure this guy out,
Yeah.
and they have fell on their face poorly until David Boylan and Larry Hancock came along.
Yeah, it's hard to analyze Oswald without your biases, right? And we've talked about this. Like, you could have Oswald as some witting spy defector or some double agent posing as a communist, but you really have to take everything.
Like I said, I always thought, that his defection had to be some kind of CIA thing, right? I've thought that for many, many years.
Me too.
But I think Larry changed my mind with him laying out why Oswald would have done that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it makes sense that it was a spur of the moment thing, and he had every intention of possibly going to Albert Schweitzer College. He's done the application. He paid for his first semester, and that maybe along the way, somebody got in his ear about, rat line through Finland that he could get into Russia, and he took the opportunity and did it. Now, are there some weird things about, like where he was staying in Finland and
How he got through? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, sure, there's some anomalies there, but it doesn't take any more than somebody in his ear in one of the countries that he visited or who was on the boat with him.
Mhm.
So, if you really want to go to Russia, I mean, shit, you can go right to Helsinki and go right in.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to go in on some weird pretext, or he may have not even thought it was possible.
Well, actually, one of the points in the book, Rob, is that the other way would have been through Berlin and then through East Germany, and it would have gone through like 2 or 3 checkpoints. And considering he wasn't allowed to, Oswald, during his temporary discharge, wasn't allowed to go away other than for school, which
Right.
was like an accepted thing, that you would take kind of the least route of least resistance, right? And I never thought of it that way either. So it's a great book, and if you're serious about the truth about the assassination, I think this is probably must read material for sure.
Absolutely. So once again, we thank Larry for showing up, and hopefully we can get Mr. Boylan on in the near future and talk about and really get into some of this Cuban stuff and Miami stuff more in depth, because that portion of the book, Joe, is fascinating. And they name names, okay? And these are, again, serious operators, and there is evidence of them being in Dealey Plaza. And the fact that, they think that it was Oswald and Sylvia Odio's along with 2 Miami Cubans is very interesting. So,
Yeah, a ton to unpack. A ton to
yeah,
unpack.
it's a lot. But if you're ever going to figure this thing out, you got to think outside the box, and you got to think differently than everybody else out there has ever done before. And I must say they've done a great job in this book. So, like I said, the link is in the description. Go get it. It's worth every flipping penny. Every flipping penny. You know, I didn't pay a penny for it. It is worth every penny. Trust me, because I had it on pre-order, and then all of a sudden it shows up at my house one day. I was like, well, hell, I can cancel my pre-order now. But
and I got an extra copy, and I actually had to send it to Bill Sipich because he did not get his.
yeah, we were going to do a giveaway here on the show in honor of the book release, but yeah, Jim D. Jr. did not get his copy apparently, so Joe had to send it out to.
Yeah,
I'm kidding, not Jim D. Jr., but I'm sure he didn't get a copy either.
Yeah,
because he was a bit last time we had Larry on. Why are you posting this show? Why are you having him on to talk about the book? It's not even out yet. I can't review it yet on Kennedy and King.
Silly.
Go
silly.
Fuck yourself, DG.
Silly. And and as you could tell, this book is more than one show's worth. And in the first show, we only got into the basis of
we were picking our way through it for sure. Yeah. But it's full of meat. It's full of meat.
I can't wait to read
meat on that chicken bone. It's not funny.
Yes. More meat left on that chicken bone than Bonnie Ray Williams.
Well, much like Bonnie Ray, Joe, tonight for dinner, your boy had a little chicken.
The Colonel.
A little fried chicken on the bone.
I respect that.
I had a big old breast. I had a chicken leg, a thigh, and a wing.
Did you leave?
It was in gravy, and it was good.
Did you leave a wing?
I didn't leave any meat on the bone. I cleaned them.
There you go. Bonnie Ray's story is bullshit.
Hey, I love fried chicken. What can I say? All right, folks.
Guys, definitely order that book, guys. I mean, seriously. I can endorse a book more than this. So
yes, and thanks again to Larry Hancock for coming on and gracing us with his presence. Always a pleasure. We love Larry to death. Thank you, Trey. And thank you, folks, for joining us, hanging out. I mean, at some points, there's still 60 people watching right now. We appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out with us. Hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, check us out Wednesday night for the members only show, the secret show, the super duper secret show. We got a plan. We're going to run around with you a little bit for an upcoming show and see what you guys think about it. It's crazy. It's going to be nuts. But we want to get your feedback. So we'll see you on Wednesday.
Oh.
Until then.
Dino.
Calling in the Dino. Where's he at, Joe? There he is. Thanks, Bungled. Thanks, Trey. You know this, man. You know this. Sally. Tiny.
Ruby will be back next week.
In the name of truth. The greatest crimes are committed in the name of justice. The quotation is Jim Garrison's. It could be used for him or against him in this strange case.
See you.
Good night.
And hi, Roger. We missed saying hi to him.
Yep, Roger's in the house. Kenneth. Hey, what's up, buddy? And the